Hello, welcome to my sort of quick rundown review of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything player options. I've been meaning to do this video for a long time, and I just have not been able to condense my thoughts because I have a lot I want to say. There's a lot in that book, and I'm only looking at the player options right now. Book as a whole, just as a quick review, I think the book's actually really good. It covers a lot of really interesting things that are difficult for GMs. It hits on a few notes that I think are just useful for GMs to remember, and that's way more important than I think people give credit for. And then it gives some cool new player options that I think were actually quite needed. We'll get into it. So, to start, I want to talk about something that people might not think of as a player option, which is the custom race information. Right before the classes section, they talk about customizing your race. Now, most of this detail is really just a nod to the GM to say, hey, if something feels a little different, if you want your world to be a little bit different, feel free to make some changes. That's okay. Here are some guidelines to doing so. And I think that's really useful. Now, I think there's potential that you can go too far and kind of change things for no reason just because a player wants a bonus as opposed to actually reflect the narrative. And as such, I think it's best if you only use it for a change in your setting or to represent cultural upbringing. For example, elves get a lot of racial features that represent their culture, not actually their intrinsic, characteristics, physically speaking. So that's really cool, the idea of having some options there. They're really just basic guidelines, and I think that remembering to use them, there's a word, I don't know what it is, but sparingly, maybe that's the word, is really fair. When I first read it, I definitely was considering this would be really cool as a background, a background where the feature is that you get to make a few nudges to your stats and stuff. I think that would have been a really cool way of doing it, so that it still feels like a choice you're making and not just, I'd like a bonus differently, so let's just change it, right? Actually making the player pay something. And I think that's such a decent background, right? Raised in a different culture is a background. So that would have been cool, but whatever. The other part I really want to talk about here, though, is the idea that there's this little sidebar. There's this sidebar that says custom lineage. And it's not mentioned anywhere in the actual text, but the custom lineage sidebar gives you a template for basically making your own race. And I really like this. When I run games, I tell my players, if you want to play a race that's not, official, make up whatever cool monster or type of creature that you want, and then just use the human template. Use the variant human rules to define it, right? What stats should they get? What feat should they get as appropriate? And this custom lineage option is basically the same thing, but it's a little bit more freeing. And I think it's a really, really good job. Ostensibly, the idea of the custom lineage is not just for custom race, but also to reflect any sort of specific culture or whatever of an existing race. But it basically is the same thing. I think it's a really, really good addition to the GM toolbox if you want to offer it to your players, which is really, really cool. Okay. So next up, we're going to start going through the classes. Some of them I'm just going to give one-line responses to because I don't have time to get into it. Because when I first tried to record this, I spent an hour on just Barbarian. So, all right, quick reviews. Artificer. I don't like Artificers. I could make a whole video about how I don't like them. They have a reason to exist, blah, blah, blah. I didn't even read the Artificer section. I've read it when it was printed in Eberron. I don't know if they added new classes or not. Don't care. That's not what I'm done. I'm not talking about it. I'm not gonna. Barbarians. I still wish they added new barbarians that let you play mundane. There's only one non-magical Barbarian subclass in the game. That disappoints me. Don't like it. As far as the actual details, I think it's generally fine and good, and they function. Bards. The Bard of Eloquence is amazing and was desperately needed. It is the most bard that there is, in my opinion. And by that what I mean is, when I think of a bard, I think of someone who gets to use their actual natural charisma to influence people, and not simply magic. So I really like that there's sort of an option for that, right? Originally we had the Bard of Lore and the Bard of Valor, and they represent two different kinds of bards, but there wasn't really the sort of like no subclass, just continue being a bard. And that's what Bard of Eloquence is to me. Cleric. Clerics, they got a reprint of Order from Ravnica, and Order is an amazing cleric subclass. Really, really strong, really, really cool. I think it's very flavorful for what it's trying to do. And I think it's both functional and flavorful, and that's awesome. On the other hand, we have the Cleric of Peace. And this one I despise. I hate it so much. I love playing sort of pacifist or semi-pacifist characters, and if peace just means a group of people who work together are more effective at killing people, then I'm mad about it, right? Like, that's not a good implementation of peace. It's just the actual design of the class might be fine, but the flavor is way off, right? You could easily design a domain of, like, I don't know, community, and it would work. It would totally work. But because it's flavored as peace, it's absolute garbage. I gotta be opinionated for these. Woo! What's after Cleric? Druids. I love Druids. They're like one of my favorite. This is the first time I'm actually going to get into the sort of new basic features of a class. The other ones have had basic features that have been added, which are really interesting and cool. But I'm trying to like only hit some high notes because I don't have time. The Druid, they've added an extra way of using the wild shape, which I really, really like. I've long said that I think wild shape should be a moon specific thing, and no one else should get wild shape. It should be subclass locked. Maybe multiple subclasses should get it, but it should be subclass locked. So adding this new way of using the wild shape feels really, really nice. It's a way of saying, I don't want to transform, and I want to have some utility. I want to be able to turn into a small creature and have it fly away and do things without breaking the design restriction of you shouldn't get flying until level 6. Right? I think there's a line in there somewhere. I've heard like a designer talk about it. So giving this summon familiar aspect to druids that allows them to make a temporary familiar that can go do a thing, and you don't have to worry about it dying. You don't have to worry about the fact that it can fly. It's really, really solid. Like it a lot. It doesn't change the power level of the druid in any way because it's just a different way of using the wild shape. It just gives them a bit more flexibility from both a flavor standpoint and a mechanical standpoint. It's really, really solid. Other than that, mostly I'm not really that interested in the druids, but what I thought was really cool was that I expected to hate Wildfire. When I heard about Wildfire, I went, this sounds like an awful design, and I read it, and it's really good. It follows through with a very cohesive design of, this doesn't feel like it could have just been anything. Calling it Wildfire feels relevant to the design space that it's using. It's not just that it's fire themed. It's not like, oh yeah, this is Wildfire because we gave everything fire damage. It feels really good because it's both about, you know, warmth and regrowth and like burning to let other things grow. Like it's really cohesive. And from a mechanical standpoint, or even flavor standpoint, having this fire spirit, which is both a like elemental spirit and a spirit of nature at the same time, feels super good. I would love to play one. Feels excellent. All right, what's next? Fighter. So first of all, they added a bunch of new fighting styles. Now this applies to multiple classes, not just fighter, but it's a good time to talk about it. These are excellent. Probably some of them are kind of irrelevant, but there's a few that really, really let you sort of design into specific niches that you couldn't otherwise hit. That's really nice, especially the new unarmed fighting style, which unarmed fighting style is a really interesting thing because people will always say, why don't you just play a monk? And I always say, well, I don't want to play a monk because I feel like monk have so much baggage in them, right? To play a monk, you have to be of a monastic order. You can't really just be a fighter who's trained in fist fighting. That really undermines the concept of what a monk is supposed to be. So it's really cool that they're adding something in here. I do think there's something to be said for, hey, fists should not be as strong as weapons, right? Like they shouldn't be. That's sort of the point. That's why we designed weapons. And I think they did a really good job at designing the unarmed fighting style so that it feels relevant. Like it has a sort of it has two different modes. One where it's just kind of like extra help, and another where like you can really lean into it and be like, okay, I'm gonna like double down. I'm gonna hit you with both fists, and I'm gonna go real hard, which is really, really cool. I think it's really interesting to me about the fighter is that they have just abandoned all pretense of trying to like make subclasses that are as appealing as the Battlemaster, and just lean into it. So they've given fighter a whole bunch of new Battlemaster maneuvers. This is both useful for Battlemasters and for anyone who takes the feat that lets you learn Battlemaster maneuvers, which is very, very cool. And I, for one, really like this. I think there's something to be said for like, I don't want to play a Battlemaster, everyone plays a Battlemaster. But the reason people play a Battlemaster is because it's so flexible, it's so versatile. It's one of those like, why don't they make a pugilist subclass for fighter? And they don't need to because they have the Battlemaster, right? They actually included a whole section of different fighter builds based around the Battlemaster to give you a good quick build for any kind of fighter archetype you might want. And it really is funny looking at it being like, yeah, there really is no point to have any subclass other than the Battlemaster. You've done such a good job. Again, they've added some extra stuff for Battlemasters too, I think. Or maybe it's just the fighting style for the pugilists, but you get my point. And I really like that. I think that's like excellent. I would love to see more stuff like that in other classes, to be frank. Like, there's some things, I feel like a lot of subclasses shouldn't exist. If they had one versatile class instead and that people could pick and choose, that might be better. Now, you shouldn't always have infinite versatility. That can sort of, you know, having a class that you're choosing is really nice. It feels good to like choose a kit and get all this cool stuff. So I get why it's based around this class system instead of infinite, like, oh yeah, why don't we just remove all classes? You can just pick things. Like, no, I like the boxes, but Battlemaster's really well done. So, whatever. As far as the actual classes that they got, I don't even care. I don't really like them. Sidekicks aren't my thing. I think Sidekicks are done really interestingly in this set. There's a whole bunch of Sidekicks classes, I should say. I haven't talked about them yet, but there's a bunch. And I just don't really care that much about Sidekicks personally, so ask somebody else. Interestingly, even with Battlemaster, fighters have gotten to a point where they kind of don't... You can build a fighter who doesn't feel like a fighter. You can feel like a general. And the idea of saying like, oh yeah, you're a fighter and you're a general, those sort of go together, that's cool. But there's like a lot of new maneuvers that let you do stuff as a fighter that's like pure support. And that's awesome, but sticking it in the fighter like class feels a little awkward. Like, I want to access that stuff, and I want to design a character who's not a fighter, but I don't want to feel like that guy. Anyway, so I think there's a lot of room to play a fighter who's not really a trained fighter, and that gets a little awkward because it's like, well, you literally have proficiency in every weapon. You are a trained fighter. You can't just ignore that. And like, maybe you can, maybe you can't. I don't know. Point is, as a toolkit, they did a good job at giving you a lot of options. Rune Knight feels weird. It's actually like the giant channeler more than it's the Rune Knight. It's very awkward. I'm sure someone's gonna have a great time with it. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just a bit weird and incohesive. Moving on. What's next? Monks. I like monks conceptually and kind of hate them in practice. Monks to me are this concept of this monastic order that like are usually relatively peaceful, but they're trained to punch people, and since it's D&D, all you ever see them is going around killing people, and it's a bit disconcerting. what I think is really cool about how they did monks in this is that you could play a full pacifism monk and you're not opting out of stuff at certain levels. By which I mean, so for example, there's the one new class which is like, I don't know, it's like Path of Mercy or something, Way of Mercy, I think that's what it's called. And it's like, oh, you're gonna kill people because that's the merciful thing to do. And that always feels like, oh, that you're just gonna go around killing people with that move. That's weird. But the reason it kind of works is because every level gives you something that both helps you hurt and heal. It doesn't force you. The example I've been giving when I've been talking with other people has been in Xanathar's Guide to Everything? That's it. Yeah, right. Yeah. There's a Druid one, which is based on the Feywild. And every time you get a feature, it goes back and forth between it being like Summer Court and Winter Court, kind of, which makes it really awkward to be like, why am I attuned to both of these? If I want to design myself around the Summer Court and play a Druid, this class is not really appealing because it doesn't make narrative sense for me to be channeling the Winter Court's energy, right? Like you get my point. So it's really cool seeing them design this monk, and if you wanted to, you could opt out of all the hurting stuff, and you wouldn't really be down much. You'd still be getting a feature every level, right? And that's cool. That's cool. Overall, I still don't like it, but it's cool. On the other hand, Astral Self, I expected to hate, kind of don't like, but I actually think is really, really powerful, and I'll probably play one next time I play a monk. Part of this is because the idea of the Astral Self, to me, is very out of body, right? The idea of a monk who meditates on the mountaintop and can influence things in the town below, that's awesome, and you can't do that, right? Instead, you have like extra arms growing out of your shoulders, but they're phantom arms. It's very weird. But it actually is weirdly cohesive, and they get a lot of utility, right? Where Way of Mercy gets like only things that do damage, and heal sometimes too. This class has like a gap level where you're not getting anything that does damage at all. It's pure utility, and it's done really well, and I quite like it. It's kind of a stretch trying to get the whole like weird astral arms thing, but I think you can do it. I think there's enough space there that you could design a really cool character. Obviously, some people are gonna have a lot of fun by just doing it as written, but I think there's still a lot of space for like a very cerebral monk who like doesn't fight. They stand there, arms at their side, and like people still have to like back away from them because they're this like their will is so strong. And you have to sort of fudge it a bit because actually having like these big arms slapping people so that someone doesn't get close is a little silly. But you can imagine the monk who's not fighting, and people walk up close and they recoil and they don't know what's happened. Like, there's something to be said for that. All right, Paladin. Now, Paladin, next class to get fighting styles. I think they do get a few new ones. Don't remember all the new ones they get. Not as many as Fighter, as you'd expect. Well, maybe the same number, but not the same ones. While there's some crossover, as usual, there's also a unique Paladin fighting style, which is really cool. It allows Paladins to take Cleric cantrips, and I think this is a really good way of doing that. Like, it always felt a little weird that you couldn't access cantrips. Now, I understand why. You're a tertiary caster. It's not your main thing, but this gives you the option of opting out of one of the primary defining characteristics of your Paladin build to lean into that caster build a little bit more. And I think that's just like a really cool, nice thing they gave them. Other than that, I believe there's a reprint of a Paladin class I totally had no idea about. I didn't realize it was a reprint until after I finished reading the book. And I'm not even entirely sure what it's a reprint from, but it is the Oath of Glory, and I love this. This is like such a breath of fresh air into the Paladin archetype. It feels so much like a Paladin. It is just like, it's still doing the thing that 5e likes to do, where they're taking a step back from the divine aspect of Paladins, and focusing on this like full adventure, like just like gung-ho, just pushing for adventure style of it Paladin, which feels so true to the Paladin fantasy. But it also is just really, really strong mechanically. And when I say strong, I don't mean mechanically powerful. It might be, it might not. I'm not really doing a power level analysis here. What I mean is that it's so cohesive. Every aspect of the kit feels like it satisfies the promise of a Paladin who's just like out to do heroic deeds for the sake of being heroic and glory and ha-ha! Like, it's just, I love it. I think it's really good. If there was another Paladin class, I don't remember it at all. Couldn't tell you. Completely don't know if there was one or not. That one was just excellent. And it's just nice, because so many of the... It's similar to the Bard, where I feel like there really wasn't a good... You want to just double down at being a Bard, choose this class. And that was what Eloquence is to me. And this one, I think that Paladins had the Oath of Devotion, and that was sort of the, like, you want to be a Paladin, just go down the path of devotion, don't worry about the alternate stuff. And then the other things are for, you know, a broader idea of what a Paladin is. And this gives you an alternate to devotion that still feels like a classic Paladin. It doesn't feel like an evil conquest or vengeance Paladin. And I'm not saying those have to be evil, don't get me wrong, but it's just so nice seeing this sort of classic feel for Paladin. It really did feel like they needed it. Like, it's a really, really compelling design for a Paladin. Moving on, we've got Ranger. And Ranger is the other class that gets fighting styles. And just like Paladin, we see them here having a fighting style that lets them lean into their caster builds. Casting has always been a little weird for Rangers. It's never really felt like it should be part of their core identity. But giving you the option of opting out of your fighting style to get cantrips from a Druid spell list feels really cool. I've previously really wanted to do like a Beastmaster who doesn't have fighting stats. They instead have like mental stats. And the idea of being able to pick up like Magic Stone or Shillelagh is actually really, really appealing as a Ranger, if that's the kind of Ranger you want to be. Someone who's a bit more thinky and a little less hunter. So that's awesome. As far as the... Oh, wow. I just realized how big of a deal Ranger is. I'm going to have to break this one up. There's a lot to talk about. All right, be right back. All right, Ranger. In addition to the fighting style stuff I just talked about, very cool, Ranger's got a complete... they got alternate options for their basic level 1 abilities, which is a big deal. If you don't know, Ranger, it's been in a weird place a long time. I love Rangers. I should say that right at the gate. But a lot of people feel like their moves are not really that useful because they're not super combat relevant. They're mostly relevant to utility, to the point where, but even that is still awkward. For example, currently the Ranger's Natural Explorer, which lets you choose a land that you're familiar with, and you get double proficiency bonus when you're working that land. I've seen every GM interpret this as, oh, it's your favorite terrain, you should totally have advantage on this check, which isn't a bad thing to do. That's a totally fine thing for a GM to implement, but that's just not the rule, right? And even if it was, it only applies to skills that you are proficient with already, and that are based on wisdom or intelligence. It's supposed to be about your knowledge, right? And I think it's really cool to be able to, like, you know, maybe sneak a bit better in your natural training. That makes total sense, but it's not in the rules. So, revisiting these abilities makes a lot of sense. Or alternatively, the favored enemy. You don't get any bonuses to fighting them. It's just knowledge. Which, again, cool, but not what most people want. Most people want them damage numbers. Which is funny because Rangers can get such high damage numbers already, but I'm not getting into that. Ugh. So when you look at the new versions, I'm doing a terrible job of this. I think they're good, but I think that the originals still have reason to be used, and that's actually a very good thing. You don't want it to just completely replace the usability of the original features. The exact specifics, I don't remember, but it's nice that there's alternatives that have different use cases as opposed to just being strictly better. Before we get into the new subclasses, let's talk about the Beastmaster rework. Because this one does seem like a problem. The Beastmaster rework, basically, it says you are more limited in your options, but you get your level 7 bonus feature immediately. You get it at level 3. And, oh, do I have mixed feelings about that. I've always thought that you should get the level 7 ability early, just as a normal thing. Like, I feel like Beastmaster is one of my favorite classes, but it sucks that it doesn't come online till level 7. And here you get those features immediately, which is cool, but also weird. It means you don't get a level 7 feature. And it just means that if you want those features early, you're really limited. The new options, it's also just not... Oh, I have a lot to talk about. The new Beastmaster options are, you get like a weird, like, kind of elemental or like nature spirit companion, which is cool. I'm sure a lot of people would love that flavor. But it feels like it could just be its own subclass instead of being the Beastmaster again. The options for those are just 4 separate stat blocks. Those are the 4 options you have, and that's it. Which is, limiting. And yeah, I don't know. There's like not a ton to say about them. They're not that interesting. But I'm sure someone's gonna have fun having a cool elemental companion, or whatever you want to interpret the, spirit of the land being. It doesn't seem handled super well. I get why they don't want to actually change the rules from the player's handbook. So instead, here's an alternative. Instead of making the Beastmaster have their level 7 early and then getting a new level 7 ability. But it's awkward. It's just really, really weird. Alright, that was a bit of a ramble. Kind of got sidetracked. Sorry about that. Finishing it off with Ranger. Alright. They got the new Fae option, which is interesting if you want to, like, dip into Fae stuff. I think it's cool having a Fae option in the class, but again, it does that weird thing where it's kind of like bounces back and forth between the courts, and it just gets a little lost. I think it's a little bit incoherent, which is not great, but I'm sure someone's going to have a fun time with it, so all right. On the other hand, you've got the Swarm Keeper, and I was so ready to hate the Swarm Keeper. When I read that there was going to be a Swarm Keeper, I was like, oh, that's awesome. They're going to let the Beastmaster have swarms, basically. That's so cool. And that's not what it is. But I also really like what they did with it. Swarm Keeper is basically like you are surrounded by some sort of like force of nature that can help you in little ways. And having it be kind of like the force of nature aiding you actually feels really cool, and I think they did a very good job at implementing this class well. All of the class features feel like they line up and are like, they feel like they all come from the same class. Sometimes a class doesn't do that. Sometimes a class feels like 4 different abilities that have nothing to do with each other, and that's kind of a bummer. This one I'm really happy with. Very, very interesting. It's kind of just like a nice little bit of utility, but I think the theme actually lands well. Personally, I'm not super interested in being like a magical swarm of butterflies or anything, but the idea of it being the force of nature aiding you because you're so in tune with nature feels actually pretty good, and it feels more Ranger than Druid in a way I wouldn't have expected. Like I'm impressed. Yes, you could theme it as being like, I have a swarm of bugs that like work with me, and that's cool, but inherently the book says that it's a magical connection. It's not just, and not even magical connection. They are, Fae spirits. It's not an innate attunement with this swarm of butterflies or rats or whatever, right? It's something more supernatural than that, which is, you know, use it if you want it, right? Cool. After Ranger, we've got a Rogue. And Rogue, there's like a new base feature, which is nice. It just gives you a bit more, it rounds out the curve a bit. It lets you activate your sneak attack more reliably if you're having difficulty, which is cool. I like that. Basically, you can take aim as a bonus action to get advantage. Cool, great. And then there are the series of actual subclasses. The only one that stood out to me was I don't even remember what it was called. It's like some sort of like death attuned one where you're not just an assassin, you're like a magic assassin. And I was, again, like kind of impressed with how well it worked. All of the features line up, they're all coherent, they all like go together, which I really, really like. And the flavor of it is a bit weird, but if you're trying to lean into sort of a more supernaturally, spiritually attuned rogue, it's a decent way of doing it. Sometimes I get a little bit put off when I look at something and I go, well, but why can only rogues do this thing? This is such a magical thing. Why can a wizard not do this? Why can a cleric not do this? And here, I don't know what it is about it, but it felt very appropriate somehow, that like this weird person who is like touched death in a very like visceral way could pick up this power felt actually appropriate, and I could see it fitting into a campaign well, as opposed to just seeming arbitrary, which sometimes that's what happens when you're looking at subclasses. So that's cool. I think that's really all I should say about rogues, which is great. You know, there's a psionic subclass for rogues. I don't care about it. Ask somebody else. I'm not touching psionics right now. That's someone else's purview. All right, cool. See you after. So, sorcerers. I feel like I have a lot to say about sorcerers, but I'm going to try and keep it light. The whole point of this video is to keep it light, just hit the high points, and I've been getting too deep and too waffly. We don't want that. Sorcerers have some stuff I like and some stuff I hate. So, core features, they've got some new meta magic, which is awesome. Meta magic's sort of the most interesting part about sorcerers, in my opinion. Being able to sort of like on the fly tweak how a spell works is a really cool way of making bringing out the feeling out the flavor of a sorcerer, as opposed to a wizard who is like, they can't edit it on the fly because it's so, you know, entrenched in the academia. It's very, very cool. I like it. I don't remember the specifics at all about what they can change, but I do know they have a elemental changing, which is cool. You're going to see this again in Wizard, I think. I should brush up on that one. I don't remember at all how the Wizard one works, but it's cool seeing you being able to like on the fly change the damage type of a spell. We all know that Fireball is statistically overpowered for its level. And being able to say, cool, I'm going to change that to a different damage type is awesome. It's very, very fringe utility because, you know, usually you're not really dealing with damage resistance of certain types, but fire is the most commonly resisted damage type, so it could definitely pay off sometime. If I'm not mistaken, you can also swap out your meta magics at levels ups and stuff like that, so you don't even have to like invest too deeply in it just for that fringe utility. So that's cool, that's cool. Again, there's some few others, don't remember what they are, but I remember them being pretty good when I first looked at them. Other than that, I know there's a psionic subclass, which again, not getting into. And then there is the Clockwork Soul. And this is the one that really disappointed me. When I first saw the Clockwork Soul, I went, oh, cool, all right, some sort of constructed nature. I've actually made my own subclass for sorcerers who have kind of a like Frankenstein's monster assembled theme to them. I really, really like that subclass that I made, and I was really curious to see what they were going to do. And this just isn't that. It's like you're a sorcerer, but you got your power from like the plane of order, or neutrality or law or something. And how, I don't know. And how does it manifest? It manifests as like symbols of order, which is like gears on your body, but like not actually, just kind of like runes that look like gears. It's like, why do they look like gears? As far as the actual mechanics go, it's a lot of stuff that's like trying to bring things to true neutral, right? It's you can force a roll to not be at advantage and be at neutral instead, or force a roll not to be at disadvantage and be at neutral instead, which is like a cool concept, but like it's not really. Meh. And then I think higher level, you also get some stuff that's like, what do you call it? Like, you're able to shift you're able to like take 10 on rolls if you would otherwise have gone lower than 10, which, like, again, not really neutrality, not really law or order, because, well, you're using it to like bring up the average to you're raising the floor, you're not, minimizing the curve. It's just, I don't know, it feels like kind of a mess. The theme is kind of weak. I'm sure someone's gonna have a good time with it, blah blah blah. I'm a grumpy blah. Anyway, that one I was really disappointed with. I didn't like it. I thought there was so much more potential, and that's the thing I've been noticing in this book is like, it's not that something is bad, it's that I'll see a name and it'll inspire me in a ways that I feel like it falls short on, which isn't really its fault necessarily. If it was called something different, I might never have acted that way. I don't know. Warlock's got some really cool new stuff. I really like the amount of stuff Warlock's got. It's very, very cool. They've got invocations, which is awesome. They've got a new boon, which is awesome. And they got some new subclasses, which I quite think they're well designed. For invocations, I don't remember the specifics. You're going to hear me say it a lot. You already heard me say it a lot. What am I talking about? This is almost at the end of the video. But yeah, they have a bunch of new invocations, give you some different options, which is cool. And they have a new boon. And this is what's really interesting, because we haven't seen a new boon yet, right? That's something we didn't get in Xanathar's, even though we did get invocations in Xanathar's. And this boon is really, really interesting because it is a talisman that you can like give to anyone. Like, you can sort of take this representation of your power and let someone else wear it, which is really, really interesting. Of course, invocations can buff what it can do, all that good stuff. As far as the subclasses go, we're gonna once again see me go, hey, I really, really like this one, and I really, really hate this one. So the one I really, really like is the Fathomless, which is such a surprisingly good class. Like, it's basically just a different option for doing Eldritch nonsense. Okay, it's getting loud. So instead of doing a, great old one to do your, like, Aboleth, you can instead do the Fathomless, which is ostensibly not really relevant. Like it's like, who cares? Why do we need another, like, deep sea Eldritch being subclass? But I think it's done really well. It's taken the Great Old One, which is like telepathic and stuff like that, and said, how about you shift that into being more watery themed, which is cool, deep tentacles and stuff. It has some weird stuff about like summoning tentacles, which can like grab people and give some really interesting utility. The theming of that's a bit interesting, because like not every like Fathomless is gonna be like tentacle based, but they can be like big spires of water instead of tentacles, and it still works, right? So I don't have a problem with that. I think that's great. I was impressed with how well everything felt like it does line up and is coherent and makes sense, as opposed to just being like, let's throw some tentacles on it. Like, it actually felt relevant that it was this Fathomless god, and not just we have taken some random abilities and themed them to the Fathomless. They feel like they actually, both mechanically and flavorfully, line up, which is really, really cool. The other one, on the other hand, is the Genie. Or maybe the Djinn, I don't remember which one they call it. I don't like this. I was ready to love it. I was like, oh, cool, genies. I love genies. Give me a Marid-based Warlock. That's cool. Now, if I was going to do that, I'd probably play a Fathomless instead, right? Just because I like the Fathomless design better, and there's crossover. Now, that's something I think is really cool about the Fathomless, that there is this crossover, and I think that's okay. It gives you options instead of feeling like you have to choose the one that's most appropriate, because there's multiple that are appropriate. Anyway, the genie is mostly characterized by getting a vessel that you may enter as if you were a genie, which is weird. Is that supposed to be the idea, that the Warlock of the genie is like starting to become one? I don't know. I don't like it. I think it's dumb. I think there's potential. Like, that it could have been interesting. The idea of having this like extra dimensional space that you carry around with you that you could hide in. That's really cool, but like, it's got a bunch of weird rules to it. Like, you can't stay in it for too long, so you can't like really take like rest in it properly. I don't know. It's weird. It's weird, and I don't like it. And it feels like it's a flavor miss. It's like they asked themselves, what do we know about genies? And went, I don't know, Aladdin's lamp. And you're like, sure, great, awesome, cool, give them one of those. It's like, what? Why? What? Anyway, I don't know. Personally, I thought it was a big miss. I don't have great ways of saying why. Whatever. I'm going to leave it at that. All right, wizards. I've actually been really looking forward to this one. In theory, I feel like wizards should be really cool, but the way they've been treated by 5e has sort of, I don't know. It's just like there's all these other casters that do what they do better, kind of. And I feel like the heart of the wizard has been lost. But I'm actually really happy with what they got here. I think this is one of those ones where I'm going to go, this wasn't just good content, it felt necessary for the health of the game. So that's really exciting to me. First of all, they got a nice core feature, which lets them sort of change up their cantrips after long rests, which I love. I think that's great. It's like, cantrips are supposed to be these really simple spells, and yet, if you don't know them, you don't know them, and you can never know them, and it just feels weird. So it's really cool, and it works really well as a wizard thing, right? Like, that's something that separates wizards from other spellcasters. I love it. I think it's great. I think it's awesome. Now, as far as the subclasses, first they got the Spell Blade, or whatever it's called. I don't remember what it's called. I don't remember. I don't care. It's from Sword Coast Legends. It's just a reprint. It's a reprint of something that's not even new, is really the thing, right? I know there's been a few reprints in the book already. Your Paladin of Glory. You got, I think Druid of Spores. I don't think I even mentioned Druid of Spores. Druid of Spores is cool. It got reprint, right? I didn't even mention it during the Druid section. And I recently found out that Bard of Eloquence is also a reprint, which I did not know, because that book is relatively recent. Or at least I didn't notice it. I don't know which. Blade singing or whatever. Weird class, feels like a bard. I don't get it. Anyway, not important. What I'm here to talk about, is the Order of Scribes. And I adore this. I think I had higher expectations than I think were met. Or not even like higher than were met, but like, when I heard about it, I was like, oh, are they going to do it? Are they going to finally make a generalist wizard that feels good? I tried to design a generalist wizard. It's hard because you don't want to just give them everything all the time. You don't want them just to be the best wizard. So it's difficult. And I'm really happy with what they did. They went in a weird direction that I wouldn't have, but I like what they did. Again, I'm getting in too deep. I need to actually hit the high points, skip by. But yeah, they got like this magic spell book. They're extra good at writing, all spells. It's like, I think, less of a benefit, but it applies to all schools of magic, which is appropriate. They sort of attune themselves to their scribing instruments in a way that I think that was a really smart way of doing it. Now, the weird thing about the class is that they sort of give you this awakened spell book that is debatably alive. And I think they did a good job at making this sort of up to interpretation, which is nice. They could have easily made it so that you kind of are forced into a specific style of game. But I think that they kind of didn't. Like, yes, if you want it to be a living spellbook that's actually alive and an NPC, you can do that. But if you don't want that, it can also just be like a magically powerful book that you can channel your own consciousness through to extend your spellcasting ability. Because that's kind of how it actualizes, is that the ability to spellcast is extended through it, more so than it's actually doing stuff itself. When I mentioned Sorcerer, I did say that Wizard is getting the ability to sort of fix their damage type and their spells, and that is what it's meant talking about. It is done via this new class, this new subclass, the Order of Scribes. And what's really interesting about it is that instead of just being able to choose the spell type, they're basically able to make new spells by looking at the formulas for their existing ones, which feels so Wizard. As much as I think Sorcerer being defined by the meta magic is really, really cool because it's sort of this innate thing and it's a little bit special for them, the idea of being able to look at spells academically and go, well, if this spell works this way and this spell works this way, can I combine them? So it doesn't give them as much range as being able to say, I need a spell that does ice damage with fireball stats. Boom, I did it. Unless they also know a spell of the same level that does ice damage as fireball, level 3. And the reason that is so much more limiting is because, well, you already have a spell that does that damage type. Just use that spell, right? So it lets you tinker a bit, but it doesn't give you full control, and I really, really like that. All right, so done there. Moving on. This is the part I've been most excited about. Wizard is the last class. So it would seem like it is the last thing I have to talk about. But there is another player option that I don't think most people have noticed, and that is sidekicks. Now, I'm not saying that you can just decide to give yourself a sidekick at any given time. You can't. But if you look at the GM section, there's a section about how to design sidekicks. And the intention of this was to let you take NPC characters who really shouldn't be able to be adventurers themselves. They're NPCs, they're lackeys, they're hirelings. And have them at least scale a little bit. Now, not fully, but a little bit of scaling so that they don't fall completely behind and just get one shot in a big battle, right? Someone throws a fireball and boom, all your hirelings are dead because of the AoE damage, right? That's sort of what the design is for. And I will talk about the different types of sidekicks in a little bit. But the reason I'm talking about it is because there is a section that says, here are what we designed sidekicks for. Your GM might tell you that every PC gets a sidekick. Cool. The GM might tell you that the NPC that's with the party, everyone has full control over that NPC. It has higher sidekick stats. The GM might say the NPCs with you have sidekick stats, but the GM's going to control them. But it also says the GM might allow people to play sidekicks as their main character. And this is not intended to be as competitive, as mechanically strong as a full player character, but it's intended as a more streamlined, less crunchy experience for people who don't know the game as well, or just don't want to engage with the mechanical, combative side of the game as much. And this speaks to me so strongly, because that's what I'm super into, right? I'm into these characters who are not really adventurers. They're going on this adventure, but they're just people. They're not trained warriors. They're not spellcasters, unless they are. And I think this is a really cool way of showing that the world is bigger than this, but still giving you a space that feels reasonable. I've played characters who are supposed to be kind of normal people, and it always feels a little tone breaking when those people have, 50, 60, 80 hit points. They shouldn't. They're not. They should not be as strong as the other PCs. And I've said to my GM, hey, I'll take a level down. I'll take 2 levels down to fit the narrative that I'm trying to tell. And they've all been like, nah. Everyone should be the same level. Thumbs up. And I'm like, all right, sure. I mean, I'll still do it, but it feels a little weird. And these rules feel great at letting you be not an adventurer, but still able to hold your own. I'm really impressed with them. Now, the way it works is that there's 3 types of sidekicks. You got your fighters, you got your experts, and you got your spellcasters. And this is sort of these broad interpretations where you got, basically you have your martial character, you get your spellcaster character, and then you've got your, other. You got your, person who is just an accountant, maybe, right? They're the shopkeeper. They're not supposed to be the heroes. And these are my favorite because they're just people. Now mechanically, I'm super into the expert because they get stuff that no other hero has, right? They're not just a worse version. They took the most interesting parts of Bard and Rogue and combined them and gave it to you a little bit differently, right? In Xanathar's Guide to Everything, there is a rogue subclass that gains the ability to use the help action as a bonus action. Now, they get a range bonus to it, which is really, really cool, and I believe the expert doesn't, but the expert gets that ability, out the gate, instead of waiting till level 3. It's so cool. It really lets you play support without playing a healer. I love it. I love it a lot. Just so cool to see that in the game. Something else that I haven't mentioned yet is that you can choose. The way that it works is that you don't just play a normal playable race. You don't have the racial background. These aren't classes, I should be clear about. These are their own things. They're add-ons to NPC stat blocks. And the rules are you start with a monster stat block that's of a certain CR or lower, and then you add on these features. Which means there are actually rules to play a ton of monsters now without having to make your own racial stat block. One time I was talking with the GM about if I was playing an imp in a game, and I was like, I could just play an imp. I'm okay with just taking the imp stat block and just playing it and never leveling up. I'm cool with that. But if we were gonna level up through that thing and play it as a PC, how would you do the race? And it's the problem with race rules is that they need to be balanced, right? They're designed to be balanced, which means they aren't an accurate representation of the race they're trying to be a lot of the time, if you're trying to go something weird like playing an imp. But with this, as long as it's low enough CR, you can start with any monster. Now, you can't play them as, a full-on PC. But you can have them be your main player character. The terminology is weird, but that's actually an option. You can go to your GM and say, hey, can I just play a sidekick? And it's not just you being a weirdo, it's in the rules. I love it.